Captain Silas Thorne wasn't known for his combat brilliance or his flair for battlefield speeches. He was known for his tea, and for always having too many blankets stashed in inappropriate places. When his crew groaned about missing rations, Silas found a way to conjure a scalding cup of Earl Grey and a thick woolen wrap smelling faintly of lavender. It had become a joke. Until the war with the Drejj Confederacy reached the frozen wastes of Harkeen Four, the Drejj had landed first. Their drop pods melted into the ice, carving out quick trenches and deploying thermal shields that flickered and failed within hours. Their physiology wasn't designed for cold. Their skin, a slick, amphibious layer, cracked in sub-zero winds. Frostbite spread across their limbs like ink in water. The humans arrived 2 days later, not to fight, but to hold the line. The UEN had no interest in Harkeen Four beyond its mineral caches, and even that interest was lukewarm, but the Drejj wanted it badly. Something about a sacred burial site, or a strategic corridor, it changed depending on which intelligence officer you asked. Silas stepped off the transport with his boots crunching against the frost. Around him, the rest of the crew set up camp standard-issue tents spiked into the ice, thermal lamps, ration crates. They weren't expecting a battle. They were expecting a standoff. "Captain," Lieutenant Pella Junks called out, adjusting her frost goggles. Recon drones picked up movement along the east ridge. "Drejj patrol, looks slow." "Slow like tired or slow like bait?" Silas asked, placing a tin kettle atop a portable burner. Steam hissed as snowflakes landed on the metal. "They're dragging their gear." One collapsed mid-scan. "I don't think it's bait." Silas exhaled and opened a crate. Inside were 6 folded wool blankets, each sealed in plastic. He tossed one to Pella. "I want to meet them," he said. Pella blinked under her hood. "Sir, that's not protocol. Protocol says we wait until they fire first." "I'm not interested in freezing to death while we wait for someone to blink." He packed the kettle, 5 cups, and 3 blankets into a sling bag and started toward the ridge. Pella didn't argue. She'd seen him do stranger things. The wind screamed across the slope, carrying the scent of ozone and burning plastic. A Drejj soldier lay half buried in snow, his breathing shallow. 2 others crouched nearby, rifles slack in their arms, faces cracked with frost. Their armor, designed for humid jungles, had turned brittle. Silas didn't raise his weapon. He knelt beside the collapsed Drejj, unzipped his bag, and set the kettle atop a flat rock. The burner flicked on with a blue flame. One Drejj raised a rifle. His hands trembled violently. Silas held up a cup. "Tea." The Drejj didn't respond. The rifle lowered a fraction. Steam curled upward. The smell of bergamot and herbs wafted across the ice. Silas poured a cup, wrapped it in a wool sleeve, and offered it forward. "Drink it," he said. "It'll help." The Drejj stared. Then, slowly, he took the cup, his long fingers wrapped around it. He sniffed, blinked, then sipped. His eyes widened. Silas laid a blanket over the collapsed soldier. Another went around the Drejj who had taken the tea. The third one backed away a step, unsure. Silas didn't push. He just poured another cup. Back at camp, Pella paced near the comms tent. "He's been gone 40 minutes. We should have heard gunfire by now." Private Oren tapped the screen. "Thermal says he's still alive, and is that a heat signature spike?" Pella leaned in. 3 Drejj, 1 human, all stationary, heat rising. "Is he making soup?" she muttered. Silas returned 2 hours later, frost clinging to his beard. The Drejj didn't follow him, but one of them waved. "They're freezing to death," he said, setting down the empty kettle. "They've got a dozen more holed up in a broken cargo skiff." "I gave them the blankets." "You gave them, sir. We're at war." "Not officially, and they're too cold to shoot." Pella frowned. "Command's not going to like this." "I'll take full responsibility," Silas said. "But I'm not going to let anyone die from frostbite while we sit here pretending to be statues." The next morning, a Drejj envoy approached the human camp. He was wrapped in a human wool blanket, held together with electrical tape. He didn't carry a weapon. "I am Soldek," he said in clipped English. "You gave us warmth. Why?" Silas handed him a cup. "Because you were cold." Soldeck drank, lips twitching at the taste. You do not wish to destroy us, Silas glanced at the snow-covered horizon. I don't even want to be here. I was supposed to be retired last year. I grow tomatoes in my spare time. Tomatoes, small red fruit, good with salt. Soldeck sat down on a crate, visibly confused. You are strange, people keep saying that. Over the next week, the frost deepened. Temperatures plunged below survivable levels. The Drejj thermal units failed entirely on day 6. Silas sent over more blankets and eventually, heating coils wired from spare drone parts. Every night he brought tea. It didn't go unnoticed. The Drejj commander, a 6-limbed veteran named Havoc, arrived under a white flag. You've compromised my troops, Havoc said, shivering. They no longer wish to fight. Silas poured him a cup. Good. Fighting in this weather would be suicidal. I should detain you for psychological warfare. You can try, but I'm the only one with a working kettle. Havoc took the tea, drank, closed his eyes. By day 10, both sides had unofficially agreed to a ceasefire. The humans shared thermal batteries and power cells. The Drejj offered medical gel that worked better on frostbite than anything the humans had. Silas organized a joint shelter network using collapsed cargo pods and abandoned mining rigs. Engineers from both sides collaborated. It was awkward at first, language barriers, cultural missteps, but nobody froze. On day 14, a UEN officer named Commander Brask arrived via high-altitude skimmer. He didn't knock before entering Silas's tent. What the hell are you doing? Brask bellowed. Silas, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, glanced up. Avoiding unnecessary deaths, you're consorting with the enemy. You've given them supplies. I've also gained intelligence on their troop movements, supply chains, and internal morale without firing a shot. Brask's face flushed. You're undermining the war effort. No, Silas said, setting his cup down. I'm redefining it. Brask left, furious. Within hours, he filed for Silas's court-martial. It didn't go through. The Drejj had sent a message to their high command, praising Captain Thorne's mercy and offering a truce. Their message was intercepted by multiple UEN satellites. By day 20, the war for Harkeen Four had stalled completely. No shots fired. No dead. Just 2 camps living side by side, warming each other by mechanical fires and sharing meals that tasted like both home and alien spice. Havoc approached Silas as snow fell in thick sheets. You've done something no one has done before, Havoc said. You made my troops trust a human. I didn't do much, Silas replied. Just offered tea and blankets. You won more than a battle. No one wins in war, Silas said. But sometimes, we survive it. And that was enough. The Drejj child had 6 fingers and a fractured radius. That was the first thing Silas noticed when he stepped into the makeshift triage shelter on the eastern perimeter. The second thing was that the injury had been wrapped in what looked like a repurposed sock. She fell from a supply crate, said Yika, one of the Drejj engineers who had taken to visiting human shelters in the evenings. The stabilizer webbing snapped. We used the fabric to limit movement. Silas knelt beside the child, who blinked at him with wide, translucent eyes, her breath forming tiny clouds in the cold air. Her skin shimmered faintly, shifting between pale blue and soft violet depending on how the lantern light hit it. You did a decent job with what you had, he said, gently unwrapping the sock. The arm underneath was swollen and discolored, but the break wasn't severe. She'll need a real splint, though, and probably antibiotics. Yika nodded, her jaw tight. The gel we have isn't strong enough for juveniles. Our supplies are limited. She have a name? Silas asked, reaching for his medkit. Rivik? Well, Rivik, he said to the child, who didn't respond but didn't recoil either, we're going to have a little chat with your bone and convince it to behave. He glanced behind him. Pella had just stepped inside, carrying a salvaged heating core. She knelt near the entrance, adjusting the coils until the warmth began crawling outward, slow and steady. She's not the only one, Yika said. 3 others came down with chest infections last night. Our filtration units weren't designed for this kind of particulate density. Silas tightened the new splint against Ryvik's arm, using strips of carbon polymer and foam from a drone panel. She hissed once, but didn't cry. He handed her a small foil packet of sugared biscuits, the kind usually saved for morale kits. "You'll want to keep her off heavy labor for at least a week," he said. "And I'll ask our med officer to prepare a few broad-spectrum doses for the others." Yika exhaled slowly. "You're not obligated to help. Neither were you when you fixed our water pump 2 days ago. That was self-interest. We needed it operational too." Silas stood, brushing snow from his knees. "Then call this enlightened self-interest." A Drejj technician staggered in, coughing violently. His gill slits fluttered open and shut in erratic spasms. Yika caught him by the elbow. "He was exposed during the wind shear this morning. His mask failed." Silas nodded. "Pella, get him to our main shelter. He'll need oxygen support and heat therapy." The technician tried to protest, but Pella simply took his arm and started walking. Several hours later, after the wind had settled and the temperature returned to its usual punishing chill, Silas found himself in the Drejj command shelter. It was warmer than he expected, thanks to a strange, humming lattice of copper tendrils strung across the ceiling. Havoc stood near a console, watching a map projection flicker with static. "You've been in and out of our shelters all day," Havoc said without turning. "My officers are beginning to wonder if you plan to annex us by way of medical intervention." Silas leaned against a crate. "If I'd known that was a viable strategy, I'd have brought more gauze." Havoc's mouth flattened. "One of your people gave my quartermaster a mixture that cleared his infection in 3 hours. He now insists you are some kind of field mystic. He probably just metabolized the doxycycline faster than expected. Regardless, he's reorganizing our inventory with the enthusiasm of 5 soldiers. It's unnerving, efficiency's contagious." Havoc finally turned. "You're not doing this to win favor, I know that now, but your methods are disruptive." "To what?" "Our hierarchy, our morale protocols, the structure we depend on." Silas crossed his arms. "Then maybe the structure's overdue for an audit." Havoc didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to a panel and tapped a node. A projection shimmered into view images of Drejj soldiers and human engineers repairing a collapsed antenna array together. One of the Drejj was laughing. Not the dry, ceremonial laugh they used during formal exchanges. A real one. "You've made them soft," Havoc said quietly. "They joke, they linger. Yesterday one of them gave your technician a carved stone, a gift." "I've seen it," Silas said. "It's a fish. She keeps it next to the heater." Havoc closed the projection. "You're afraid we're making friends. I'm afraid of what happens when command decides that friendship is a liability." Silas didn't respond. He didn't need to. Havoc knew as well as he did. The longer they worked in tandem, the more likely it became that someone far away, behind a desk, would decide this arrangement was a strategic vulnerability. Later that night, Silas sat outside the shelter, sipping something hot. Not tea this time, he'd run out of leaves and was brewing a bitter concentrate from dried root bark one of the Drejj had given him. It tasted like someone had boiled wet socks in vinegar, but it was warm. Ryvik wandered over, cradling her splinted arm. She sat beside him without a word and pulled a thick thermal wrap around her shoulders. "You should be inside," he said. "You're still healing." She tapped the side of her head, then pointed at the sky. "Too loud," she nodded. He tilted his head back. The auroras had begun to dance again, green and violet ribbons writhing across the darkness. The Drejj said the lights were the sky dreaming. Humans said they were charged particles. Both could be true. Pella approached, her boots crunching softly. "Our outpost received a signal burst. Encrypted." "Not ours." Drejj, she shook her head. "No ping signature, could be mercenary or pirate comms, possibly scavengers." Silas glanced at Ryvik. "How far out?" 20 clicks, maybe less. They're on foot now." He stood. "We'll need to warn Havoc." By morning, the signal had moved closer. Too fast for foot travel. It wasn't scavengers. Havoc paced the snow-packed corridor between shelters, his breath pluming in angry bursts. You think it's a cleanse squad? Silas nodded. No transponder, no attempt at contact. They're running dark and cold. That's not a diplomatic envoy. This is retaliation, Havoc growled. They saw the ceasefire and now they're sending a message. We can't hold them off, Pella said. Not with the resources we've got. Then we don't fight them, Silas said. We make it impossible for them to fight us, Havoc frowned. Explain. Your encampment and ours are fully integrated. Shared shelters, shared systems. If they try to strike one, they hit both. No clean target. They won't care. They will if they think we've merged. Havoc narrowed his eyes. You want us to simulate an alliance. No simulation, Silas said. An actual one, at least for now. We draw them in, confuse them, mislead them. Make them wonder why human and Drejj uniforms are layered together. Why your engineers are eating with our medics. Why your wounded are being treated by my officers. Deception, survival. Havoc hesitated, then gave a single nod. We'll begin moving resources. And the banners will come down. That night, the Drejj standard was packed away. In its place, a makeshift emblem stitched from human fabric and Drejj polymer was hung over the central shelter, a broken circle wrapped in flame. Neither species recognized it. That was the point. Silas stood beside Havoc as they watched the patrol lights of the incoming force flicker on the horizon. We've got maybe a day, Pella said, checking her field scanner. Havoc turned to Silas. What happens if they open fire anyway? Silas adjusted the collar of his coat. Then I hope they're allergic to root bark tea, because that's all I've got left. The unknown force arrived just after second shift ended, moving in a tight wedge formation over the ice plains, silent and deliberate. There were 22 of them, armored in matte gray suits with no insignia, faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They didn't broadcast, didn't respond to hails, and made no effort to conceal their thermal signatures. It was a performance one meant to intimidate. Silas watched from the edge of the Drejj human shelter compound, flanked by Havoc and Yika, who had abandoned her tool rig in favor of a repurposed mining shield slung across her chest. They're not here to parley, she said, her gaze fixed on the slow advance. They're not here to think, Havoc replied. They were sent to erase confusion. Silas adjusted the hand heater in his coat pocket, then stepped forward. Then let's confuse them more. He walked out alone, coat flapping in the wind, boots kicking up powdered snow. The patrol halted 20 meters out. Their leader stepped forward taller than the others with reinforced joints and a thick cable running from his backplate to his calf. A powered exosuit, most likely. Overkill for soft targets. You're trespassing, Silas said, his tone level. This is a cooperative humanitarian zone. I suggest you check your orders. The visor tilted slightly. There is no authorized cooperation on this sector, the voice replied, filtered and artificial. You are in breach of Unified Engagement Directive 217. That directive was suspended 11 days ago, Silas replied. Per the ceasefire filed with UN Central via Relay Outpost Beta 6, I filed it myself. The figure didn't move. No such ceasefire exists in our records. I'm sure it doesn't, Silas said, because someone erased it, which means someone's trying to play politics with a frozen graveyard. The patrol leader's helmet locked on him. You are outnumbered. I'm aware, Silas said calmly. You want to open fire on a camp housing civilians, medics, and wounded from both sides. Be my guest. But when the recordings hit the networks, and you'll be the ones answering to an inquiry board. There was a long pause. Then, you've made alliances with enemy combatants. I've made allies of people trying not to die in the cold. If that's treason, you'll have to get in line behind my grandmother. She's still furious I left the tomatoes to freeze. A different voice crackled through the patrol's internal comms, something Silas couldn't hear, but the shift in posture said enough. The leader's helmet turned toward his own ranks. Then, without a word, the entire formation pivoted and began to withdraw, their boots carving clean lines through the frost. Silas didn't move until they vanished behind the nearest ridge. Yika exhaled sharply. They'll be back. Probably, Silas said. But next time they'll bring paperwork. Havoc approached, his third arm flexing unconsciously. You just bluffed a recon limb squad with bureaucracy. I didn't bluff, Silas said. I filed the ceasefire. Just because someone deleted it doesn't mean it's not real. No one's going to believe a single field captain over command. Luckily, Silas said, I'm not the only one who can file reports. By mid-meal, Havoc had dictated a formal statement to Drejj High Command, citing humanitarian cooperation, joint infrastructure repairs, and the prevention of non-combatant casualties. The statement bore not just his seal, but those of 6 other Drejj squad leaders who had seen their soldiers treated by human medics or fed from human rations. The message was transmitted through the Drejj comms array, which had been partially repaired using a crashed UEN drone's power coupler. A neat irony. The following day, a Drejj elder named Vasek arrived via sled crawler. She wore ceremonial bindings around her upper arms and moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had lived through more winters than she could count. Her presence was unexpected and not entirely welcome. Vasek entered the joint mess hall without preamble, her gaze sweeping across humans and Drejj alike seated at shared tables, eating from mismatched trays. A Drejj technician was teaching a human sergeant how to pronounce an idiom involving volcanic slugs. A medic was adjusting a Drejj child's posture brace with a fork and duct tape. Vasek turned to Havoc. You've undone generations of caution. Havoc didn't look away. I've preserved generations of soldiers. She studied Silas next. You are the human who makes tea. I also make a mean lentil stew, but yes, that's me. Vasek sat, gesturing for a drink. Silas poured her a cup from the last of the root bark concentrate. She sniffed it, then drank. This tastes like regret. That's the bark talking. She held the cup. The Drejj Council received your transmission. They will not support a purge. Havoc's expression didn't change, but his posture eased. They have, however, requested a full report on the nature of this arrangement. They are skeptical. I can compile a dossier, Havoc said. No, Vasek replied. They want a demonstration. Silas raised an eyebrow. Of what? Of integration. Pella, seated nearby, leaned forward. You want us to put on a show? Vasek shook her head. No, a show is a lie. They want truth. Open the camp. Let observers witness what you've built. Silas looked around. The camp was still patched together with salvaged parts and hope. The sleeping quarters leaked. The food supplies were thin, but no one was dying. That counted. Fine, he said. You'll get your demonstration. 3 days later, a Drejj observer team arrived, accompanied by a single UEN diplomat who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were given full access, free to interview, inspect, question. No scripts, no filters. They watched a Drejj engineer install a heating conduit built from human scrap. They saw a human medic teaching Drejj juveniles how to splint fractures using elastic tubing. They tasted the tea. They slept under the same blankets. At the end of the 5th day, the diplomat approached Silas. I'm supposed to find fault, he said, adjusting his gloves. But all I see is functionality and somehow harmony. You expected sabotage, I expected chaos. What I got was a community. Silas sipped from a fresh cup. It's amazing what happens when people aren't freezing or bleeding. That evening, the formal report was filed. Both the Drejj Council and the UEN Command approved a permanent withdrawal from Harkeen Four. The mineral rights were to be jointly administered, with profits diverted to rebuilding efforts on both sides. No one was declared victor. The day after, Silas stood at the South Ridge, watching the last of the Drejj skimmers vanish into the horizon. Havoc stood beside him, wearing a scarf someone had knitted from shredded tent fabric. I didn't think it would end, Havoc said. It didn't, Silas replied. It just changed. Havoc extended a hand, not a salute, not a gesture of dominance, just a hand. Silas shook it. Back in the mess hall, Rivik was drawing on the table with a charcoal stub, surrounded by a half-circle of human and Drejj children trading words in each other's languages. Pella placed a bowl in front of Silas. Stew's hot, Don't ask what's in it. He poked it with a spoon. If it doesn't move, I'm fine. The wind howled outside, but inside the heaters hummed. Blankets hung from rafters like banners. A kettle whistled softly in the corner, and for once, no one was cold.